Num num. Num num. Birdie num num.
When I have understanding of computers, I shall be the supreme being. God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Don't do that, Jesus Christ! You're gonna get me killed!
Out of here!
Oh, Billy. All right, we are live. Welcome to the desert of the real, and welcome to Aeon Byte. And yes, we still live in a world with men have nipples, and Peter Sellers is getting away with wearing brown face in the party. Actually, it's kind of weird because I never understood. So far, nobody has gone for Keanu Reeves for wearing brown face in Little Buddha. I mean, he talk about untouchable, uncancelable. That's Keanu Reeves for you. But anyway, I do believe that we should not make Peter Sellers great again. We need to make Dr. Strangelove great again. And he did it probably one of the greatest performances of all time. He did 3 roles. Only he could have done it. And that movie, every role was incredible. And that movie is more relevant than ever. So welcome, everybody. I don't want to get on a rant too much. It is an honor, as always, to have Gordon White, my friend, and an individual I admire very much, to discuss his new book, which I have loved, Ani.Mystic, Encounters with the Living Cosmos. Gordon, thanks for being here again.
Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to seeing you later this week, which is amazing. What an amazing thing to say.
It is. It's going to be incredible. It's great to have friends on the internet, but when you meet people face to face and you can interact with them, that's when the magic really starts to happen. So it's great to do these things. I know you're working with Greg to do something in June. So the more of these we can do, I think the more we can really accelerate the magic, the gnosis. Don't you think, Gordon?
Yeah, this is how we make changes at the level of the field, and it's always been that. It's always been ceremony. It's always been people coming together in coherence. That's what it is. It
is indeed. And with us, it's always great to have the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing?
Oh, just fine with this daylight savings time. So I managed to make it anyway. And we're going to talk about time tonight, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea because, again, I was like kicking myself today in my Cartesian ways, going, in 7 days we'll be having this cocktail party after the conference in this really nice place, and sort of playing it forward. I'm like, oh my God, that goes against Gordon's book completely. This is, in 7 days I'll be doing this and this and that, instead of today is the only day that matters. Today I die at the end of the day. So, yeah, but. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? That's why your book was it's so good. So for the audience, as you come into the chat, if you have questions, as always, please type them in questions, caps, and we will get to them. Super chats will get pushed to the top. Let's keep it on the topics of topics that don't piss off the algorithm, since this is live and I've spent enough time. Enough time in YouTube jail. So
there are fewer and fewer of them with each day, but we'll do our best.
I know, because at the end of the introduction, I was going to say, oh, and that spoof you see from the cable guy, that's also based on, I think it's Midnight Express, written by Oliver Stone. Then oh crap, if I say Oliver Stone, I could
That's too much.
We might get suspended, because his movies are getting suspended from YouTube too, his Ukraine film. So it's like, what do you say? What do you say?
I don't know. You need to be doing more like I'm doing. Everything that goes up to YouTube goes up to Rumble and Odyssey as well. Just gotta have that lifeboat.
No, I do have it. Yeah, everything for the audience. Yeah. Every video goes to Odyssey, and also I do Rockfin too. So it is there just in case it gets banned or anything like that, which has happened. But these are the times we live. But anyway, this is so much. I mean, this is eternal. This is much better than all the temporary shit that's going on today. But kind of relevant, I wanted to ask you, Gordon. And like a friend was asking me, well, what's going on? And I'm talking to family, and they're even the most skeptical ones are starting to buy into the whole simulation, because they can't. They still think that somehow we're going to get back to 2019, and everybody's jaws is collectively like dropping, like it just keeps. And I was the one, 2 years, a year ago, I said, the next one's going to be a war or a cyber attack, the UFO. I mean, it does feel like our lizard overlords are just had too much sugar and they're at the consoles of the simulation. Like, so
Well,
what
they're
do you
losing.
think? What went wrong, or what's going on that time has just gotten so bonkers?
It's an end of an empire. They're losing. And so one of the things when you step into a living universe, just to sort of bring it almost to the book, is you have frameworks of understanding for this. And we actually used to have them before we hit the Enlightenment and replaced an idea of living time with just one damn thing after another pointing off into an Enlightenment future, right? Which is just stupid. And we didn't actually get far along that journey before realizing it was stupid. So quantum theory, blah, blah, blah. But we're not allowed to say that this is the end of the West, because that can't exist in this kind of like capitalist optimist modernism where things can only get better, which was Tony Blair's campaign song, right? Like, just to give you an indication of how wrong such an idea is. And we have this in the Bible, we have this around the world. We have an idea that, and it's sort of my first book, that human cultures and lifeways can complexify and decomplexify rapidly. And the story of the next decade, and it doesn't matter if it's the shortages or if it's widespread illness or if it is, which it's going to be in about 18 months' time, proper war, this is the decade where the Western Empire ends and is replaced by some sort of Eurasian multipolar, however you want it. And it's not a good news story and it's not a bad news story. It's just what happens, right? Because there'll be some things we lose and a lot of things we lose, and there'll be some things that the world gains from it. And it's just, I open Chaos Protocols with like a Terence McKenna-ism, which is like, the problem isn't to find the answer, it's to face the answer. And people don't want to do that because it's scary. And the actual underlying belief system they've never moved out of, which is this capitalist modernist idea, is what is ending. And so people are like, they think their worldview is up here, but it's actually that up here is what they have purchased and moved into inside this kind of capitalist modernist one. And that's the one that's ending, and they don't know what to do about it other than lose their fucking minds.
Indeed. And I think your book is definitely timely because I think you offer a lot of solutions, and basically what you're saying, radical solutions on how you view nature, time, resources, how we got here, and how and just a lot of good solutions. How did you decide to write Ani.Mystic? Is it? It's a companion to Starships, right? I mean, I think.
Yeah,
I want to say spiritual successor or sequel because I've always wanted to say that live, but no.
No, that's cool. Here's what I think, anyway, because I don't know. Like, I just work here, and Starships had a separate, had a different title, and then it became Star.Ships, and that worked because it was everything. It worked on at least 3 layers that I wanted. Starships because it is about sky spirits and so on, and Star.Ships because it is about navigation and so on. And it's a Nicki Minaj reference, right? So it did at least 3 things that I like to do. But it's kind of, as I write this one, it occurs to me, okay, so Starships is my story of the past. And Animistic is my story of the present. And I'm writing a dot trilogy, and no spoilers, but you can probably work out what the next one is, right? And I didn't realize that's what was happening. And this is a story of re-embodiment in the present and re-presencing, because re-embodiment is re-temporalization, which is why I'm speaking about indigenous time next week in Mexico. And it's really fun actually to use additional research that didn't make it into the book to kind of elaborate on some Animistic style themes in that context. But it was just sort of, literally it was time. And it was time in the sense that I've been down here on this little farm for 4 years in Tasmania, and writing a book about animism means you have to hit the problems with the word. You have to hit the problems with the idea of books being a true way of conveying information in the first place, and all these other things. So it sort of co-emerged, with encounters between myself and place. So each chapter is actually about a place, and it's sort of unstructured as a book, and that had to happen in this like embodied and temporalized space. So it was just trying to solve something for myself, which is, and I'm partially to blame for the popularity of the word animism amongst magical users over the last few years, partially to blame, particularly because Sarah Lawless came on like my second or third episode of the podcast, and we had a good chat about it then, and it kind of grew with the podcast itself. And it's a dangerous word. And so I wanted to sit with that, because people with the best will in the world will say, oh, I'm an animist, because they mean real nice things, like I believe in extension of personhood to rivers and trees and all the rest of it. And there's understanding that we definitely aren't living right, you know? But the trouble is the word came from a very violent imperial process of Europeans expanding out into the world. And it was a pejorative. Like we called animists brown people who we thought had a really childlike theory of mind, who like couldn't tell the difference between their dreams and reality. And what I've been struck by in the book, and I said this before, but it's important, is it's like that Skinner meme, like it is the children who are wrong. Like it turns out we were the ones with the childish and naive theory of mind for thinking that thoughts exist only in the brain and are unattached to reality and so on. So here is the world's history's stupidest ever theory of mind leaves Europe in the mid 1800s and spreads out around the world, encountering some of the oldest and most profound cosmovisions on Earth, like in Aboriginal Australia and Amazonia and so on, and says they're primitive and childlike. And I'm just really struck by the Skinner memeness of it all, right? And so if you use that A word, you have to grapple with it being like it originating in a kind of violence that we are still, in different ways, obviously, still subject to, like at this point in the timeline. We are this Western project that's ending this decade began with that same thinking that gave us that A word. And so there's like, it's meaty and it still has a lot of energy, but you need to kind of know that moving forward. I think people maybe wanted it to be, well, the response has been universally positive. Maybe they were expecting like, and this is a tree spirit and this is a dolphin spirit, but actually it's you were caught in a haunted library of racist ideas that is destroying you and the world. So it's Gnostic animism in its own way.
Yes, indeed. I mean, and you talk about the 18th century. What do you think of like Oswald Spengler's idea that this is a Faustian culture that started probably around the 11th century? And it's a millennia of just this Faustian destruction. Do you think, have you heard of that, Gordon? And we'll have something else.
I have. So there's two things, right? Like I used the Hemingway, how did you go bankrupt slowly at first then all at once? Because there's some stuff that Europe inherited from Greek culture that I think is erroneous. And it's there in Gnosticism, but I think it's erroneous. And principally among them, it's the idea that the sacred is far from the physical, which we inherited into Christianity and it reorganized culture. But we also did that. We built a culture around the idea that there is one true book, so that books convey true things. But more importantly than that, you can actually say this is a true book and this is a fake book. And both of these are like dumb ideas. And so this date with destiny was set in like 500 BC, one way or the other, right? And along the way, there are different encounters. And what Richard Tarnas in The Passion of the Western Mind, I think, describes it's a multi-phase project of cosmological and estrangement, right? So Copernicus decentered our universe and Descartes trapped us in our head. So it's this idea that it wasn't, the Enlightenment is a big part of what necessarily I rail against, but maybe what I illuminate in this book, because it's the Enlightenment project that has done the most damage to the more than human world. So that's the specific, like it wasn't just everything was fine, then we hit the Enlightenment. It was because you're dealing with a living cosmos, you have to focus more on the worldview that allows for imperialism, because with that comes empty maps and terra nullius and all these terms, which is to say, like, these brown people not only have childish beliefs, but because they didn't use the land, that land is available for European conquest and all this kind of stuff. But I agree completely. Like, there's it's a longer journey of our estrangement, and this is kind of like coming back to what's going on in the world at the moment. We're going to lose, well, millions of lives, but also we're going to lose a lot in between now and the early 2030s. But we're going to lose some stuff that needs to go away, and so this is that kind of process. And you step into a living time framework, a living universe, and you have ways to think with that. So in my healing tradition, it's called the Pachacuti, which, so Pacha means space-time. It's where Pachamama is from. So it's the stuff of the cosmos, and Kuti is overturner. And the last Pachacuti was the arrival of the conquistadors and the Spanish into Peru, and the destruction of the Inca world, right? And this Pachacuti is the end of the conquistadors. And so they would do, I gave a presentation at an astrology conference last year where I said, like, the Kero were doing post-colonialism in like the 50s before anyone else. And so there's some stuff that is going away in this really dramatic process, which happens in a living universe, that we can be happy to let go of.
Awesome to hear. Yeah, for some reason, when I talked to John Michael Greer, he thinks, and I don't know why, but he feels that the next, culture, which will be completely alien than anything we've known. I think Ani.Mystic will probably is probably predicting it, but for some reason, it's either going to be somewhere in Russia or Ohio. Of all places, well, Ohio always
Very
has been,
specific.
right?
I
Yeah, I don't know why I think it's because of the valley and the rivers. That's how, you got to do the geography, but whatever. We shall see, shall we?
I don't know.
And
I think my money's on South America. So I had a client the other day who told me, I hadn't heard this before, but he said South America is the continent of the future and always will be. Used to be a thing they sent down there to kind of, I mean, it's not their fault that the American empire kept collapsing every kind of government that tried to help them. That's a factor, right? And put all the Nazis down there and all the rest of it. Like, they haven't had a good 500 years of a good clean run. But there is a, like, from a food and energy and everything else perspective, there are fewer, it's in a pretty good place. So I'm not sure where the Ohio thing comes from. I do believe, like, some sort of pan-Eurasian stuff is going to come back over the next century, but I wouldn't rule out South America yet. There's another Kero prophecy about, in the Pachacuti, the eagle and the condor will fly together again, and that's kind of indicating the rise of South America, and to kind of like fly with Turtle Island. So, we may not be here for it, but it will be interesting to kind of look down and see.
yeah, we shall see. In the sequel of Ender's Game, it's Brazil who's the great explorer of the universe. We shall see. It's fun to play with these things. Yeah, and I think with animism, like you said, it's not just a term. You quote Rupert Sheldrake, who says animism is both an archaic and new way to see the world. And I think what you're advocating is we really need to think in a new way. The idea, as you say, of empiricism, that we're just going to keep adding knowledge, and we'll get animism, we'll get gnosis, we'll get UFOs. You're asking, we need to change our thinking, our language. And that's what individuals like Jung and Jeff Kripal keep saying. No. Owen Barfield, change your language, change your thinking. Don't just try to add data to things.
Yeah, exactly. And so it reminds me, I like that what Dr. Sheldrake said, right? Because it reminds me of when Charles Eisenstein talks about a new and ancient story, or the ever-present origin, right? Because the idea, and this is why the book is so, dare I say, unique in its structure and its material, is the idea of a past as a sort of preceding sequence of events, where maybe you can go back 5,000 years and find one, that is itself a product of the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment basically gave us linear time because it needed to tell the story of the progression out of superstition into scientific enlightenment. So the trick with animism is like, you're not going back to an ancient belief system. And I did a lot of work with Aboriginal Australian thought for this book. And it's one of the things that quite urgently conveying is that, like, we're continually practicing cultures for 50,000 years, but we're not a 50,000-year-old culture. That's an Enlightenment European idea, right? So this ever-present origin or new and ancient story is that the kind of idea that you can step into that, that perennial cosmovision. And if you try to think of it as something from the past that you are replicating, then you haven't done it. That's the trick. You're still stuck in the Enlightenment framework. So to get to animism, it's kind of like you can't be half pregnant. Like you have to step in or not. But that was literally why the book had to be structured that way, because if you tried to sequentially explain in an authoritative way in a book with academic footnotes what animism is, then you've missed it. You literally haven't done it, because you've made it a dead thing to be pinned to a corkboard and hung in the Natural History Museum. So it's, yeah, as I said, the response has been quite good. I think most people have hit the book and encountered that, which is great.
Yeah, I love it because it's non-linear, it's personal, but I kind of knew, I said, okay, I know exactly, I kind of knew what I was getting because I've read Starships, and this was the stars in our past. This is us going through Earth, through Mother Earth, and experience it and finding new ways to perceive time, and how all the things that you've experienced that got you on this journey. I love this quote by Bruno Latour that you quote. And he says, "We have never been modern." That stuck out to me. What does that mean?
So Bruno Latour is one of the kind of, I mean, he's still alive, but I think, for my money, like, very important late 20th century voices in that gap between like post-colonialism and what in anthropology became like the ontological turn. But Bruno makes the point that the collection of claims about reality that underpin modernity are savage. And they are as primitive, and he uses this to be, cheeky, as primitive as the ideas that we find, savages in Africa believing, like, oh, they think that mask has a spirit in it. Yeah, well, we think that we can build ever more complex mechanical devices and live forever. Like, that's stupid. And so he actually kind of like goes through the list of claims about reality that underpin modernity. And one of them is this belief that moderns have separated themselves from this process of savagery and superstition. That's a key one. So again, it's the Skinner meme. It's like, it is the children who are wrong, but it's really important when you're going to situate yourself in relation to a thought term like animism that comes out of this erroneous modernity that thinks it's modern but isn't. It's part of the way out of the maze, right? It's to actually grapple with, like, well, shit. Animism, and I think I end the introduction by saying that, like, animism might be a collection of archaisms, but so is everything else. So this whole idea of like, oh, these are primitive, savage ideas from the past. It's like, yeah, everything is. That's not a differentiator. You still have to grapple with reality.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, well, I mean, what's the old cliche? The Tao that can be described as not the Tao. The animism that can be described as not animism. So, and let me quote this other great part of your book so the audience can get a good gist of the ethos of your book. And you write, Gordon, what is required is not a revolution in energy efficiency, but a revolution of love, a fundamental shift in principles away from techno solutionism and materialist naturalism towards animism, toward the profound felt understanding of the relationality and interconnectedness of all things. And I think that's brilliant. And I had a vision of, blue check saying, we need to save the environment. No, you don't save the environment. Become the environment. Engage with the environment. Lose yourself in the environment. That's animism.
Yeah. So one of my favorite academics in this space, Professor Tim Ingold in Aberdeen, has this great presentation called "There's No Such Thing as the Environment," and there isn't, right? Because that's literally an artifact of a measuring process that comes out of it. Like, where do they begin and end? So there's some really important work about, like, okay, so this particular bay here that might get migratory birds, like, that's an environment we need to protect. It's like, okay, so where does it end? At the shore, 3 trees back from the shore, the seabed, and is it are they native to that environment if they're only there for 10 days of the year as they come back to like lay eggs or whatever? We overlay a machine on what is a universe that is a community of living beings, and out of that, and maybe when the heart is in the right place, it's easy for people to not see this or miss it. But and I'm really informed by Charles Eisenstein's work around like climate change here, where climate doesn't exist. So I joke that I'm like a animist permaculturalist climate denier, in the sense that I literally deny the existence of climate. Not that I don't think carbon dioxide contributes to warming. I mean, like, there's no such thing as climate. So they've used that word because their models didn't get the warming and everything that they wanted over the last 25 years. So they went from global warming to climate change, and then you're a climate change skeptic to you're a climate change denier to you're a climate denier. Like, they keep dropping the words off until they just become meaningless. But the funny thing is, they've landed on one where I'm like, yeah, that's me. You've come back around to me again. I am a climate denier because there's no such thing as climate. And it's Charles calls for that revolution of love, because I remember being a kid, and even before Greenpeace became horrible, but I remember being a kid, and environmentalism in an Australian context happened here in Tasmania with a gay dentist named Dr. Brown. And he was kayaking on a river system that we were about to dam. And he's like, we can't do this. And so that was in the early 70s, and that was a big defining watershed moment in environmentalism and green politics in Australia. And it was local. So they stopped, Bob Brown stopped a dam on a river, called the Gordon River, actually, but he stopped a dam on a river. But now, and this is Charles's point, we're asked, and your president is asking you for democracy to pay extra for gas. But like, it's this abstract idea where blue checks in an urban context can like extract other resources to give to a diffuse idea rather than contribute to the restoration of a local river or something. So everything in environmentalism, which used to be think global, act local, is now think global, pay the globalists. And that is not, and it's also why it fails. So every time we're like, okay, this is all crap, but it's the urgency is sincere. Like, we've got 9 years to save the world. Every time you boy who cries wolf that, things get worse and people listen less. So Charles's point is calling for a revolution of love, where it's like, let's stop trying to fear and yell people into abstract change and assist them or help them into coming back to that. People don't want to destroy the woods out the front of their house. Like, they literally don't. There are ways in that are animist. They're about coming back into relation with the beings around you, and that's transformational. And people think, and this is again materialism rather than animism, but people think, well, that's too small. Well, the bigness and thinking that the only things that are real or effective are big is what got us into this mess. That is techno-solutionism. And so the revolution of love is a revolution in learning again how to operate at the level of the field. So I'm really excited, as you can tell, and passionate about, I guess, post-environmentalism, because that's I don't have another word for it. If people don't want to use the A word, we're going to have to put post in front of something else, and no one wants that. But post-environmentalism or something, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so much potential indeed. Vance, do you have a question or from the audience?
Well, I've got a couple of questions. People have been thinking a lot on the chat, but there's only a couple. I'll go with the most recent one first. Oswald Spengler, he lives on our YouTube chat here again, says, could you, Gordon, comment on the work of Paul Kingsnorth?
Sure. Especially in the last 6 months, I've been very happy. Again, we stray close to topics we can't talk about on the YouTubes. I've been very happy with him standing up for basic logic and decency when it comes to life versus the technocratic idiocy that we've been. See, we can do this. We can talk about it without talking about it. Very happy with that. And that is part of his longer arc of environmentalism and then post-environmentalism, because and this happens to people, I think, in a British Isles context especially, maybe not, maybe it's everywhere, where you can kind of start with a concern for the local, and this is no insult really, for your local environment, and then kind of turn Tory and then kind of turn conservative. And so Paul's sort of ended up, and bless him, because everyone should find their spirituality, has ended up like an Orthodox Christian, which comes with a sort of conservatism that I am not in full alignment with, just is a polite way of saying it. But I'm happy for him, and I understand how he went from an alarmed declinism of the world to that, because orthodoxy is kind of the place people seem to go to who need a framework for reality, and in particular, a reality is everything else. There's a whole bunch of stuff they don't like. But in the last 6 months or so, when he's been talking about our medical situation and how insane it is, has been mostly good, were it not for his like vicious dismissal of these so-called conspiracy theorists who have been right all along. But in terms of, it's like his original work's alignment with something like Ani.Mystic, there is a more declinist, melancholy, glass half emptiness to Kingsnorth's work, which I still like, than there is. Animism is, or Ani.Mystic, it's still kind of chaos magic. Like, it's actually more optimistic than people realize. I actually want to move into Charles Fort's dominant of wider inclusions in witchcraft. I've said from the very beginning of my career, I want to be the guy in Ghostbusters from the EPA who opens up the containment facility. I've always wanted to be that. And Ani.Mystic is the story of like, let's live in this wild, broken place with weeds and abundance and this kind of like decentral, love-based relationality, rather than like, and this is unfair to Paul, like boo-hoo the polar bears or something. That's just not. There does need to be, for it to be a spell, there does need to be more optimism. And I get to the end of the book and thought, wow, like maybe I was looking for the optimism for myself, because I wasn't sure if it was going to be in there. It's heavy topics. It's like imperialism and blah blah blah. And then I get to the end and go, I feel good. I feel good that I went through that journey. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Animism is it's a way of thinking that not just the big world, but it can accommodate high weirdness. It can accommodate UFO, archons, politics, ghost spirits. It can it takes the whole ecosystem of high weirdness without a problem. You don't just have to live like in, I don't know, some hippie farm and deny everything.
No, exactly. And that's kind of, and I think that, remember, that's how we lived for.
Mm-hmm.
Humans have been animists, again, leaving aside the challenge of the word. We kind of know what I mean by that, for 98% of the time we've been on Earth. So it's not just our natural mode. Like we know how to do it. You watch kids and they are that, right? They're in, and again, it doesn't mean that you have that naive childlike view of your own mind and thoughts, but they nevertheless have sometimes like a healthier experience of the inner and outer, right? Which we drill out of them. That's just your imagination. And it's not, it's like, it's your imagination, right? So yes, I agree. And also, although I wouldn't, in the book, I don't even let people use the word ecosystem, because it is a machine term, like a system. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the closest way of saying it is like, animism is an ecosystemic view of the whole cosmos. So that doesn't mean you have to, live in the jungle. It means that archons and aliens and all this other stuff are beings in the kind of, one of my favorite things that Ursula Le Guin said is the word for world is forest. And so the cosmos is a jungle. The cosmos is a rainforest, and there are beings in it, is it. And that is archons, that is demons, that is angels, that is, and wherever you are, that's true.
And as you pointed out, 90% of cultures believe in evil spirits. Swedenborg believed in evil spirits. The positive Hermeticists believed in evil spirits, and for the audience, if you want to know, the closest to Animistic Gnosticism would have to be the Manichaeans, where everything was alive and everything. But it's interesting you said about kids, because I was reading on that bed the other day your book, and my daughter comes, Ellie, she's 6, says, "What's that book about?" I said, "It's about animism." "What's that?" And I said, "Well, that everything is alive." And she said, "Well, Daddy, is your leg alive?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, Daddy, is the picture frame alive?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, how come it can't move?" I'm like, you should be sitting here on a Sunday night, maybe next time. Get drilled by the
she
6-year-old.
she can grow into the family business.
Yeah, exactly. Was there another question, Van? Sorry if
Yeah.
I jumped off.
Yeah. Occult fan, our buddy Nate.
Oh, hi, Nate. I
says-
can't chat, but hello, Nate. Yeah.
Yep, he's out
I
there.
can't type in the
He's
chat. Yeah.
I'm sure he says hello back, and he will in a minute. He'd like you to comment on the Gigi Young material about gray aliens being the non-organic timeline.
I'm not super familiar with it, but I get the feel of that. I really do. Whatever they are is, and a lot of people in ufology in the 20th century speculated that they were some kind of like AI or meat robot or what have you. So my one experience with them was that they were very like artificial and had that metallic taste in like you licked a circuit board kind of experience. So I'm not familiar with the material, but even if that's not exactly correct, it's certainly approximately like I know why she said that. Like I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people think that the some of the alien species actually have some sort of unity with what we call their ships. That they become their ships. I've read accounts of that, so that reminds me of the things you're saying, about animism tonight.
Well, it's just one of those fun things you can do when you play with time. And it's the one that haunts me the most, quite literally, is what Whitley said in the Supernatural. Whitley Strieber with Jeff Kripal, is that an advanced civilization would have worked out a way of maintaining lossless communication with their dead, right? And funnily enough, we might have got there when spiritualism was big in the US in the late 1800s. There were a couple of politicians in Washington at the time. They were advocating for government money to go into researching how we can do after death communication. Now, if we'd done that, we had 150 years. You put the kind of money we put into the military industrial complex into that, and that would have been one of those strategic interventions you can make to accelerate a civilization to interplanetary. Because once you can do that, you can get me the smart ones and tell, let's work out how this tunnel between the worlds works and so on. So when it comes to speculating on the kind of visitors and other beings out there in this cosmic rainforest, yeah, the ones that are kind of inseparable, if you can do that, your relationship to matter changes completely, and there are probably more efficient hybrid ways of being in the world for sure. But just even on our understanding of technology, if you are a biological organism, it is safer, especially if you're doing interdimensional stuff, to send a meat robot or an AI. Like we check out other planets with robots first, and so there's something that's an oversimplification, but there's something in that. There's something in like the Greys being something technological.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Miguel, can I ask one more question from the audience here?
Sure.
JC3D wants to know, what do the animists think, if there are animists, think of the number 1? Numbers, are they alive? He wants to know if their numbers are alive.
So it's actually quite a good question, because everything that exists is some kind of alive, but there are different levels of agency and personhood. So if you think about it from, say, a Pythagorean perspective, that you can kind of have the numbers 1 to 10 being cosmological forces, they're, in that sense, they're alive. So like 1 is a thing but you wouldn't, it's an extra level of abstraction away from the kind of relationality you will find in what we call animist culture. So they won't come into relation with the number 2 necessarily, but 2 exists and is a power, right? So depends where you go. And also it depends on how far you want to stretch animism out, right? Because Dr. Sheldrake would say, based on his definition of animism, that the Pythagoreans were animist. So in that case, yes. But in the way I mean it, which is more like literally seeing the universe as a rainforest, it's a power in the universe rather than this. So like rain, individual rainstorms can be beings, and rain is a power, and there might be a rain god. So there's a bit more nuance to it. Is a good question, though.
It is a good question indeed. And yeah, for the audience, Nate the occult fan is actually going to do also a presentation at Astronosis this weekend. He's going to be doing on aeons and the Gematria. Gordon's presentation will be on borrowed light. And yeah, can you give us a little teaser while I put the banner here, Gordon?
Borrowed sunlight specifically, but
Borrowed
it's about
sunlight, sorry.
yeah, it's about experiential time in a living cosmos. So it's basically indigenous frameworks of time and what they can teach us about how we get time wrong. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I've been putting it together. I mean, I should, because it is due this week, the homework, but I've been putting it together today going like, oh, this is fun. This is going to be a fun talk. And looking forward to Nate's too. That'll also be good.
Yeah, he always brings. He does some good research, and Vance does some good research. What yours? Tell us about yours, Vance.
Well, Gnostic Euphoria is going to explore the commonality between Gnosticism and Gnostics and aliens, UFOs, and things like that. In which you will find out that one of the biggest UFO religions on the planet is Christianity.
Ah, cool. Good angles. Yeah, I'll be doing Gnosticism and Stargates. I think it's been underreported, but the Gnostics were very much into some precise maps and Stargates. In fact,
They were
a little teaser. Both Origin and Kelsus had these Gnostic star maps. So you go from this here, and you go to the Draco, and you go through Venus, and you can get out of the universe to the next dimension. Both are lost, but both. These guys were definitely foes of each other. They wouldn't, know, it's not like one's lying to get it. Both were like, yeah, we both have these maps, but let's argue about these guys. So that's some good teasers on there for everybody. So please, if you can't make it, and we already got about 50 people making it, hopefully more, you can stream online, and you'll get the whole thing. If you're busy on that Sunday or Monday or whatever, we will get a replay of Astronosis. So very excited on this one, and look forward to your presentation, Gordon. I should mention too, you of course, again, you talk about the places you went, and there's some things that make me laugh. I don't know, because I'm weird, like something weird will keep me laugh. But you talked about your journey to Pompeii, not Pompeii.
Pompeii.
How do you pronounce? Yeah,
Pompeii.
Yeah. And you were talking about how there it's abundance of avocados, and the humans don't eat them. They just throw them to the pigs. And you're like, imagine the millennials having a heart attack across in the United States. Like,
Australians eat more bananas like per capita, I believe, than anywhere else. And so bananas you can't buy them on Pompeii because the banana trees are just growing everywhere. It's like, doesn't compute, right? If you need some bananas, go and get some goddamn bananas. That's if you live there. If you don't live there, if you're visiting, it's like, I can't get these things. And yes, avocados were brought in as pig food about 100 or so years ago. And again, once they're like mature, these trees don't need anything. It's a high rainfall environment and volcanic soil. It's not like you need to do anything to like fertilize them, and it's warm all year round. So they're just going to like keep dropping avocados. It's the most amazing thing. So bananas and avocados are in every fruit basket in Australia and are very expensive. And they're free in Pompeii. They're very low status in Pompeii, and it's just, the world is beautiful. Like, it's beautiful and crazy.
Yeah, I can see right now by the end of the night, millennials will be on Twitter telling Biden to make Pohnpei part of NATO and protect it and all that, and they'll be imagine they would be crushed if accidentally Putin invaded Iceland, because he used to make fun of. Remember when that was like the destination for millennials for vacation? I never understood that.
Yeah, it was all it was like Game of Thrones and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Iceland, and also they had, you know how blue checks seem to think, even though people in the Nordics will tell you otherwise, that the Nordics are perfect and there's some sort of perfect social democracy, even though most of them are monarchies. The one that was like the standout was like, oh, Iceland. And so it did everything right, because it's like, oh, they have 100% renewable energy, and like, yeah, because it's just a volcano. Like you can do that.
Geothermal energy,
yeah. You can run a very small population on like the continuous upwelling of geothermal energy. So it was the place. And then they made Game of Thrones there, and that was it for the Guardian readers. That was the place to go.
Humans are so funny. But yeah, back to your book. The other part which I loved, and I even told you about that, is you were talking, I remember what chapter, but you're talking, and then you have this really cool footnote, and you said Gnosticism could have only arisen in the desert. I was like, he nailed it. That's always been my suspicion, and maybe you can share your. I mean, with me, I've always said the portal between apocalyptical Judaism and mystical Judaism to classical Gnosticism is Paul. That's pretty much been set. What does Paul do as soon as he has his conversion? He goes to Arabia for 3 years. So he must have gone, like you call this place of the illusion that will kill you, where you have to go to just let go of everything.
Yeah, so I think, and this is the case, and it's not surprising. So cultures that live in the Amazon think the world looks like a rainforest, right? But more than that, you actually get methods of navigating complexity out of Amazonian cosmovisions that you don't find anywhere else, because they are in the most biodiverse place on earth. Like I remember thinking when I went on my first ayahuasca dieta, that I like this idea of getting away from it all. It's the opposite. It's more crowded than a New York subway. Like you're just surrounded by beings. And at night, it is so loud. I had earplugs in, like I was under the Heathrow effect.
Really?
Wonderful, right? Now, so cosmovisions are humans express. That's one of the things we do. We are actually kind of like filters and expressive mechanisms, and we do it through ceremony and art and everything of other beings and what's around us. Like I've had conversations with trees where it's like, well, of course I'm using your mouth. I don't have one, idiot, right? And so there's this kind of like flow model understanding when it comes to cosmovisions. And in the case of Gnosticism, there's a couple of things there. If you get, life is very dangerous, and almost everything will kill you, and it's harsh and very unpleasant, except for like 1 or 2 trees that you sit under by, like, a small pool of water, where there's this sort of this idea of an oasis is really psychologically compelling, right? It's this place in this really hostile world. So it's like there is not much medicine or not much succor in a very harsh and dry world. But more than that, when the sun goes down, because I've been out under the stars in the desert, more than that, when the sun goes down, you actually realize that the universe is not how it plays out during the day. So it's cool. In fact, it's cold at night. So you do need to be aware of that. But you and the fires and the infinite stars of an evening. So that association with when you die, it is night. And night in the desert is just one of the most beautiful things. But during the day, if you get life wrong, if you stray a little, you will die. And there just aren't that many places for succor. So it's just like Gnosticism is a desert song. It's just what it is.
No, I think it's really well said. And the desert is the place of Seth, the great trickster. That's where Satan takes Jesus to test him, to make him into a god. So
And also
show
mirages,
them.
right? Like it's this idea that there's literally this hostile place is beset with illusions, and you think,
Hmm.
of course, Gnosticism is a desert song, in the same way perspectivism or whatever is an Amazonian song.
No, makes perfect sense. And again, for the audience, there's so many cool gems that Gordon puts in his book. Here's another one. You call synchronicity Omen logic. I loved it. Can you explain more? Because again, and obviously, I'm sure Jung was never static. I'm sure he would have loved people to develop, because he changed, he evolved his ideas of synchronicity and archetypes, and then,
Exactly,
time stopped and he had to go. So I'm sure he would
exactly.
love synchromysticism. He would love synchromysticism, but Omen logic.
So Omen logic is a term I used first when I was teaching tarot course to premium members at runesoup.com. And it actually emerged from something. I added the logic to it based on a conversation about tarot I was having with Chris Knowles, like a private one, where he sort of said the logic of how tarot works is not in universe. And he meant that, obviously, having a career in comics, he meant that in a comic book sense. But I really liked that. I really liked the idea of like the logic of how tarot works is not in universe. And so Omen logic is a deliberate phrasing of synchronicity to demonstrate that there is an intelligence behind it. So like that Terence McKenna thing of like, why is the universe story shaped? Like, why does narrative describe reality? That's weird. That it, in a materialist scientific framework, it shouldn't. It should not, like the universe should not be shaped like a story, but it is. And so Omen logic is when you have, so you're going to go, oh, that's a bit of a synchronicity. It allows you to, it's almost creepier in a good way. Like it almost like creeps you into taking the fact that there is an intelligence of some kind, even if it's part of yours that you're not in relation to, behind it. And so Omen logic is, and once you do that, you take the next step, which is languaging it. So it's Omen logic to Omen language, which is once you see it that way, once you see it as kind of like semaphore with your own unconscious, then you, rather than just going like, oh, weird, I was just thinking about you and you rang, and we all get, dozens and dozens of them over the course of a year, but you can actually dance with it. You can actually start to, it's trying to speak to you, you're trying to speak to it. It's turning a friendly face to the unconscious. But if you, it's a spell. If you use the right word, it works better. And Omen logic is one of those for me, I think, because it's not synchronicity's fault, but there's not that much tread left on those tires, right? It's been used. It's done a lot of heavy lifting in the 20th century, and I think in an animist world, I'm just more explicit. Like, yeah, I'm an animist. I think the universe. I literally think the universe is a rainforest. Like metaphorically, that's what I think it is. Like spirits are real. Omen logic. Even if it gives people permission, personal permission, to like just move that little bit weirder, just step a little bit weirder, then that's what terms like this can be good for.
Step at the edge of town. And speaking of language, I also like how and you quote how Forrest thinks by Eduardo Kahn, and he talks about we must deprovincialize language. The world is full of language and we must learn their language, right? I mean, and of course you talk about the greatest example is John Dee. He had to learn the language of the angels. It wasn't like he had to demand that they speak English or something like that.
Yeah, it's that's an amazing book. It's a bit complex. I'll do an okay job, I think. I'll try my best of putting this across. So the study of languages, various types, so like linguistics and etymology and whatever, the study of languages predates anthropology by about 150 years, 100 to 150 years. So what happens? And we built our study of languages, linguistics, on the study of our own language. So basically the root words of English and German that we got from some kind of like Eurasian civilization, right? And that turns out to be unusual in its structure compared to human languages, like almost unique. And so once we built this, it's like, okay, this is how languages work. Then we go and study other languages and like, well, Chinese doesn't work like this, right? Or whatever. And then it gets even weirder when we built this idea of language, that this is the deprovincialized part, that's based on not just a human understanding of what language is, but like a specific collection of humans' understanding of what language is. And then we look out into the more than human world, aka nature, and we don't see it. They don't have the globe theater. They don't have, any of the stuff that we say. And so we say language doesn't exist in nature. Animals don't have a language. They don't communicate. And so this book, and it's based on Dr. Cohn, who's a Canadian anthropologist. It's based on his years of work in Amazonia, among the Avaluruna in particular. He learned how they understood the language of the forest. And so the forest, hence how forests like speak, how forests think, is its own communication field and is communicating. And the human capacity to do things like use metaphor and symbolic language isn't the norm, it's the exception. And it's the exception on the planet, like on a biomass basis. Like we think, we are wrecking the place, but we think by mass, there are more earthworms than humans on the planet. Like if you put in like some giant scale, the earthworms on one side and the humans on the other, there are more earthworms.
And ants too, I think.
Yeah, that's where we are, right? And so we are, even on a biomass basis, abnormal and a minority. And when you open up that's what he means by deprovincializing. So when you open up and democratize language to something that living systems and living beings do, you suddenly see them for what they are, but you change your understanding of what humans are in relation to that. It was a cornerstone book in my adult development, maybe about a decade or so ago. Like, it was life-changing, and it's so good for people who are like in magic, because the magical implications, hence why it's a magic book, are like stark, frankly. And profound.
And for the audience, that is Eduardo Kahn, How Forest Thinks. And magic, if somebody says, well, Gordon, how is this a book about magic? What is your answer?
Well, because it is a collection of beings that you can come into relation with. So it's not about magic, it is magic. That's how it's a magic book. And that was actually quite challenging to do, consequently. It's a lot easier to just give people little recipes. Maybe I'll do that with a third of the dot books. But it had to be, rather than describe the animist universe, it had to live in it. And so it is a collection of beings. And I kind of say that at the beginning, like asking people to read it in unusual places, because each chapter emerged out of my relation to a specific place. And so I want that to happen to when people read it as well, because that's how it's a magic book. It's a sharing of beings.
I would say so too. What's like Philip K. Dick said, the Nag Hammadi library wasn't information, didn't contain information. It was living information. I would say the same thing too. It's something you experience. You're saying, you have to experience these things. Like you talked about, McKenna said, you don't try to understand the world, you experience the world. And this is a book you want people to experience. I experienced it from your, there are times when I was sitting outside, like, God, how would I feel if I was driving my little Peugeot with occult books through fire and trying to get people to do a magic spell before my house is destroyed? There's all these or you coming to Santiago and like getting off the plane and going, holy shit, look at the Andes. I mean, I've seen the Andes when I was a kid, and it's like, you see giants. You really see the giants. So it's a wonderful book in so many respects. Vance, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we've got a few. Let's see. DW the Wild Beat wants to know, what's the healthiest ratio of mystics-animist to doomsday prepper for us to aim for during the next 18 months?
That's a good question.
It is, but and it's kind of top of mind for me at the moment, because I'm completing a presentation about how we understand time in a living universe, right? Because what implied in that question is a metaphysics of time, which is we can't really know the future, but we can scenario plan, right? And that's, you should be scenario planning anyway, but you actually can come into relation with the future. Like that's what divination and all the rest of it is. So it's a question of like represencing yourself, because it'll be different for you depending on what your context is. And there are techniques, and there have been for millennia, of going into ceremony and being present with that future, and also pulling in futures that are less final, I guess, on an individual basis. So I like the question, but it's actually well, what's 18 months? Like, do you think the future is fixed? It kind of, like, the future is alive, so it's not necessarily fixed, but you can come into relation and see bits and adjust. But on like a lot is the other side of that. Like, I want to give you real advice as well as like go and learn time magic. Is it gets like it gets bad. So a lot is the answer to that question. So if you fancy a holiday, come to Mexico now. Is what I'm saying.
Okay, Mordecai wanted to know: could you bring Gnosticism and Animism into the conversation for the audience?
And I have for years. Classic blog post from a decade ago of Gnosticism is the map, Animism is the territory. And that's how it is for me, because I believe the universe is alive. And that's why when Chris and Miguel were on the show recently, I wanted to know if Miguel thought that if Gnosticism was universal in the sense that we can find the Gnostic impulse around the world, or if it's unique. Because if it's unique, I don't think it's reality, but I do think it is the thing. I have this idea, and it's really naive and new agey, that there is in fact a world belief system, and it's kind of like Voltron, and you sort of like put together bits from Amazonia and China and Aboriginal Australia and whatever, and there's this, and I think we do that and leave the planet or something, although Chris says we're not going anywhere. But I have this kind of like really silly, naive idea that there is a planetary belief system, and I think the Gnostic impulse is one of those bits that goes in my cosmology for it, because it is a powerful, urgent magic. And I would say it's a powerful, urgent magic for coming back into relation, because I'm going to say it in an animist context. But I would say Gnosticism is the map, Animism is the territory, because Gnosticism gives you a map of the urgent stuff, a map of the power plays, a map of the tyranny, a map of the things that will destroy you before you get into right relation. So I think I don't think, especially for us in a body right now, you need some Gnosticism in your life. But it's the map, and Animism is the territory is my kind of like go-to for it.
Yeah, great article. Yeah, make it through the day, so at night the stars will liberate you. And yes, it is universal. The myth of Prometheus, the Anunnaki and Enki, Ahriman, and
see, that's not even that
Zoroaster.
universal, though, right? This is why that's not that universal. That's what's interesting. That's all in one little corner of the world. And so I'm just, I don't know yet. I don't know.
But I mean, when you look at some of the trickster myths in South America,
this is as
North
close
America,
as
you start going right into Gnosticism. These beings
so
help
then would
humanity.
you say, this is important, would you say that the Gnostic impulse is a culture-specific variation of the trickster, or would you say that the trickster is like a variation of Gnostic? I think it's the first one. I think Gnosticism is a culture-specific eruption. Yeah. So there is a universal. That's cool. That makes it fit better for me. I think it's like, it's a trickster song. It is a trickster magic. I like that.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I've always told people you got to see Sophia and Jesus versus tricksters. If you want to figure them out, that's where they start. No, they're not your saviors, because the trickster ain't going to save you. He's going to change you. He's going to rock your world.
Of course, there's the spirit of Gnosticism versus the instantiation of it, and in the beginning of 2,000 years ago too. I always think of Gnosticism as the spirit of trying to find out to see what's really there despite what people are trying to convince you of because of their vested interests.
The mirage is always out in the desert. See through the mirage.
Yeah. So, more questions, Miguel? I got a couple more.
Sure. Yeah, good question from
Okay.
the audience.
Now, here's a this is a difficult question, I think. Mr. 1864M wants you to provide a concise argument. Do you have a concise argument that slightly persuades a Western-centric thinker to take animism seriously in the context of meeting a person on the bus, introducing them to animism, like the elevator argument, I guess he wants?
Well, you're on the elevator with your fucking 9 to 5 job and the bus going to work. I mean, what argument do you need? Get out.
I am. So this is my third interview so far. Like I did one with Greg, and Greg got the worst of them because it was the first one after I'd written the book, which I handed in April of last year. And I had this
so
kind
you're
of
still pretty. You barely remember what page.
Yeah. This is, I'm like, looser now, and I've remembered what I fucking wrote. But the reason, what came to mind was what Sean Connery said in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where it's like, I wrote it in my diary so I didn't have to remember it. Is how I feel. I'm sure you do as well, Miguel, with like books. Yeah. So to the person like sitting next to them, you tell you what, if you're reading my book, hand it to them and go and buy another one. Yes, it's a Scarlet Imprint book, and so don't do that too often. Because it's a lovely and beautiful object. The trouble with a concise definition of animism is there's the academic one, which is that the universe is composed of beings or persons, only some of whom are human. So you can say that. Or you can trick them into it. Like, well, do you think your cat is a robot? Or do you think it's a person? And they're like, it's definitely a person, and it's a dick. And that people usually, when they realize that the official reality tells them that their pet is a meat robot, they're like, well, that's dumb. And I'm like, it is dumb. So it depends what you want to do. If you want to trick them into it, ask them what they think their cat is. If you want to give them an academic answer, it is that the universe is composed of beings or persons, only some of whom are human. Or if you want to say, well, so what is it to be an animist then? It's like, it's living in flow. So the kind of quickest way, it's almost like Taoism, because Taoism is an animist framework, but it is living in a universe that is continually forming rather than already formed. And that's the main difference. Out of that kind of fixing of the universe, we've got the Enlightenment and all the rest of it, which, because I saw it in the chat, what is his definition of life? My definition of life is a subset of that. It's flow. So I don't have a definition of life. I have living. So it's actually to verbify. Anything that verbs is life, is living. And that's the kind of flow model for it. And funnily enough, your daughter may get that, right? Because in fact, it's not that all so-called objects are alive. And there's a very famous anthropologist, really important to the kind of jailbreaking of the discipline, called Hallowell in the mid-20th century. And he spent years with the Ojibwe peoples. And so he's trying to get this idea of like some stones are people, some aren't. And so because there are sacred stones that are beings that have been part of tribes and ancestors that are passed down. And the Maori have a similar thing with like taonga and other treasures. And so Hallowell's asking his guide, like, so, like, is this stone, like by the river, like, is this stone a person? And the guide looks at it and looks back at him like he's a moron. Like, no, the hell is wrong with you, right? So things that move are alive. Things that have agency or impact history in a living universe are alive. And so the definition of life is flow or living. And that's kind of, at this point, you've reached your stop on the bus, and it's time to go.
Given enough time, everything moves, right? Every rock, every piece of
Exactly.
matter, everything. So
what about the only thing that doesn't is like when you stop, you die, right? So when people have cancer, what they actually have is the body's inability to remove cancer cells, because we have that, like everyone has cells that have mutated and are moved out. Anything that stops or restricts, anything is pathological and is removed. So that's the kind of one of the main challenges of that imperial framework encountering like non-Western frameworks was they believed the universe was fixed, like it's done, like it's a zoo, and everyone else is like living in flow. And it's really like you have to, why the book is the way it is and structured the way it is that's easy to say and people can nod along going, flow. But do it. And it's hard. Like, think with it in that way, and it's actually really challenging. At least to start with, it is like riding a cosmic bike at some stage.
How about the idea that the universe is one gigantic, infinite flowing being, and all of us are little icebergs, kind of like instantiations, and we look separate, but we're really part of this one thing? Is that compatible, or
It's better, like, it is better than materialist naturalism, because everything is. But why I specifically say I think the cosmos is a rainforest is, whilst that's probably, like, is the rainforest one being? I think where we are, it is more medicinal to think of the universe as a community rather than a single being. It is a single community for sure, but it's a really good question that, like, ultimately, I guess, in a kind of ultimate but ultimately pointless philosophical position, it's like, yes, the universe is all just one being, one thing, right? That seems pretty, people feel that and go, that feels about right. That I think it is one living sacred thing. But we are nevertheless at a point where we're really fucking things up down here, and there's more medicine on the way to that journey. The cultures and life ways that have lived, and I'm fascinated by Aboriginal Australia because it's 50,000 years old. It is seen off ice ages, right?
Wow.
So as the West ends and we lose all our technology to cyber attacks and all these other crap that'll probably happen in the next 8 years, who's going to live through it? Who's going to sail through it, right? Aboriginal Australia, not just in general, right? Like, not everyone. Most of them are currently urban and probably as fucked as the rest of us. But any of these cultures that have thrived for tens of millennia have kind of, like, the resting philosophy is the universe is a community of beings. One community, but a community of beings. And I think that's the most medicinal intervention. It's a great question, but I go with it's one community rather than one being, even though, like, it probably is one being, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess you could probably go the other way too, like from the top down or from the bottom up, right? You're going from the bottom up, I think, and what I'm proposing is from the top down, because from starting from the universe as one gigantic being, then you can say, oh, look at all the little pieces of itself that interact, like inside a body, the different organs working together. There's your community. So probably
Sure.
either way, from the inside out or the outside in.
But so a body is more microbiomal than it is anything else, right? So the body is a community. Like, I agree, but, like, I default to what happens when you call the universe a community of beings, and a rainforest specifically, is that that description carries with it what we're supposed to do here, which is to, like, mutually flourish. So if you think about a community of beings like a rainforest, this one poops, that grows the plant, that does the thing, and everyone, and humans who live in that context, know that their job is to maximize the flourishing of the whole cosmos. And there again, Aboriginal Australia does this. When the colonists first encountered watering holes that they built that they weren't using, like, they weren't used for humans. It's like, why are you building these watering holes? It's like, well, so the kangaroos have somewhere to drink. And it's like, are you hunting them? It's like, no. Now there are more kangaroos. So there's actually, if you think of the universe as a community of beings like a rainforest, it has a telos, which, and Terence would have liked this. It has a telos. It has a pushing itself into the future as increasing expression of more and more things, ideas and people and beings out into the universe. So it grows like a rainforest or community. And that thing, I don't know if time ends or if that's what it is for all time, however you want to say it. If it's just this flourishing rainforest moment forever, I don't know. But I think, for me, I get what I'm supposed to do here out of the idea of the universe as a community.
Now, in a rainforest, I don't think the rainforest, as I conceive of it, had to deal with the emergence of parts of itself that became aware of itself enough to model itself, enough to rise and see itself as separate the way we humans do, which kind of relates to a question somebody asked about, is animism compatible with transhumanism, right? So
That's a good question, sort of. But here's the other thing: it is faster if you are a tree spirit, right? It is faster to grow up the monkeys. If you want to get off the planet, it is literally faster to evolve the monkeys to build a spaceship than it is to evolve an arm, right? So if you look at how humans have been co-created by the more than human world, and especially when it comes to like the so-called stoned ape theory and the rest of it, if you're a plant and you want to get off this planet, it's faster to get the humans to take you than it is for Basil to grow legs and a brain. So
that's interesting.
We don't know. And let me tell you, from like from an ayahuasca context, plants are, well, in an Amazonian context, plants are considered the teachers because they've been here the longest. Mm-hmm. So you diet trees and plants, and they teach us because we're new, and they've been here for much longer, right? And so once you realize that you can have a person or a being without a brain, like it can be, because it is a spirit, especially one that's 500 million years old, like a fern. Fern has learned a thing or two, and it's quicker for a fern, if it wants to get to Mars, to create an Elon Musk than it is to grow some legs. And that is one of those like, fuck, what the hell's going on here? Community of beings idea. And the other thing is that works in both ways. So one of the in the sort of rainforest Amazon parts of the book, I rely on a bunch of research of the Amazon's an overgrown garden. So we think of it again, this imperial idea of this pristine, untouched wilderness. It's
the lungs of the world, as Macron calls
them. Nothing of the sort. It is a garden that is more neglected than mine, right? So if you actually look at the species assemblies in it, there's a much higher percentage of things that are useful to humans who have been put there. Any human culture, I prefer Lifeway, that lives in a forest context has created that forest, and it's simple stuff like growing one plant rather than the other. It's moving juvenile plants. It's we've always done that, so that the Amazon, humans created the Amazon and the Amazon created us. Mm-hmm. So it's this co-creation, and when you include spirit in it, it starts to get weird. Like maybe Basil hatched a plot to build Elon Musk to get us to Mars. Probably not, but it. I don't think it was Basil exactly. But you start to play a very different game, especially because trees, and this is that Tolkien stuff, like they think on different lifetimes to us. Like there are trees there where our breath in and out is 1 year, right? So they just don't have that same sense of time. But that's how it feels for me anyway.
And as you write in your book several times, we have more vegetation now on Earth than ever before, which the environmentalists don't want to hear, but it's true.
Exactly. It's and we're still not doing things right, but if we actually looked at the positive stories and lent into them, going like, that's actually good news. That's good news.
Something to cheer about.
Yeah. And we could do more of it, and we could do more of it in a controlled way, and not controlled way like controlling of it, but we can make the right interventions, because that's how it is. You don't run a planet. This is real Taoist stuff, right? But you make the right intervention so that the flourishing happens, and we should be doing that. Maybe we will. Maybe in 100 years' time we get there.
Oh yeah, yes indeed. And one thing I wanted to ask you, and I'm curious too. I'm going to try to, and this is I'm kind of going way to the side, but I'm going to couch it. Right now there is this proxy war going on somewhere in the world with East and West, and there's this issue with the BIO labs. What is your inside? Do you have any inside baseball on this one, Gordon? Because it seems to be that's how things are going to go one way or another, right?
So the predictive frameworks that I rely the heaviest on for my own life and for kind of putting together forecasts for the membership and so on have, and it's one of the reasons I think Martin Armstrong got the previous health incident so correct, which is to say it's a couple of years too early, is as part of the next few years, which will include like a legit world war, 2024-ish, we have an increase in.
But how do we? Sometimes we need to define these things. For example, like fascism. Who knows? Nobody knows what fascism. Because
Yeah.
now
So,
everybody's
yeah.
throwing World War III. Some people, yeah. How do you define World War
Well, that's
III?
a really
World War
that's
I
a really good
wasn't a
question.
world war. World War II was a world war. Some people think the 1813 war was the first world war. So,
But also, like, when historians will probably look back at now and say, well, when do you begin a story of this kind of conflict that's actually been going on for a couple of centuries? Like, where do you begin the movie, right? And that's fair. That's a real fair thing to say. Like, historians just kind of do the lazy thing of saying, well, we begin a world war when it's declared, right? Like when Britain declares war on Germany or whatever it happens to be.
yeah.
But it's a real good point. As for the structures that you mentioned, in the forecast for the next couple of years is an actual increase in, like, shall we say, pathogenicity, which may well be human derived given how things are going. But it's just, these are neocons. This is what they do everywhere. And I'm not surprised that we, in violation of NATO agreements, set them up sort of within slingshot distance of where. Anyway, we're doing pretty good at, like, talking about it without talking about it.
And would you say the neocons are a cult of death or just good capitalists?
Yes. No,
both.
It's explicitly, yeah. They're a death cult. They actually do want. They think nuclear war is winnable. They think it's actually a thing that we should do and win. And I'm like, what? Anyway.
It's not that rare. I mean, Alan Dulles thought about it many times. He was lobbying presidents. Let's just let them rip, have the guy in the cowboy hat down on Russia here and there. It was just.
Meanwhile, he's got his ticket to the bunkers, right? That deep in the earth.
Well, they're like, where do they think they're going to go?
Deep
where
in
do
the
they
earth.
think they're going to go after they've
Mount
won a
Weather,
nuclear war? It's
all these
very
horrible
confusing.
places. The COG thing, right? The continuation.
Remember Dr. Strangelove, George C. Scott, when Dr. Strangelove talking about the plans and every man will have 20 women to reproduce. I mean, they really buy into that stuff.
And that's a death cult, because they actually want to live in horror. Like that. Anyway, yeah. It's when all of this started a couple of years ago, and I was in deep despair. So towards the end of 2020, I did some fairly intense kind of like angelic summoning stuff to try to go, why are you allowing this to happen? Why have you allowed this to happen? And I got a hold of some beings who would answer to the name of angel, but are so far out and so old that it's just an incorrect thing. I don't know what they are, but they would answer to that. Mm-hmm. And they're like, if we intervene to stop it, basically, you idiots will do this again. And so the comfort or the medicine that I got out of that was like, yeah, you have to, we are going through this so that we never do it again, ever, which is good in a way. And the other thing that's comforting, I sort of mentioned this on Greg's show as well, is there are more people on this planet now than there ever have been, which means we have come from across dimensions to bear witness to this moment. And even if it's so that we all like vanish in the one nuclear flash, whatever it is, this moment is so important that we all, like, I have to get seats. I have to see this show. I have to see it live, right? Mm-hmm. And that is important. So whatever we're doing is we're birthing, and I think this is the Pachacuti. I think we're birthing this new world. And when you look at it from a despair perspective, look at it from like, and yet you showed up for it, and you didn't show up alone, and that's good. That's, there's some hope in that.
Yeah, as Dr. Manhattan said, nothing ever ends.
Yeah.
Yes, things will continue. Life will continue. Our consciousness goes far beyond these bodies. So we just have to minimize the suffering of the world. And do the best we can, find out what our purpose is. We each have a purpose, a sacred purpose. Well, good deal. As we get to the end, any last question, Vance? I have one more question for Gordon, and then we can.
Yeah, I got a few here.
One
Let's see.
question.
One question. Oh gosh, I got to pick one. All
Well,
right,
they could
let's
use the
see.
super chats if they wanted to get their questions.
That's true.
That's true. All right,
There's a lot of questions, and there's limited. There's
I'll have
limited
to,
Western time.
I'll just have to pick one at random. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. What do you know, Gordon, about rhesus negative blood types? Talking about monkeys, right? Just a moment ago.
So there is any of that stuff, and genetics in general are useful markers of things like population movements. I actually say this in Starships, which is I don't think, and I learned this from Dr. Sheldrake, I don't think genetic theory is correct. We've just been through this incident of 2 and a bit years. We're still going through it, where we have these non-diagnostic tests for things that don't necessarily match what is experienced in reality. And it's because on a baseline level, that model is wrong. And so when people ask that as a kind of like leading question, like, do you think that's alien blood in the bloodline, right? Maybe, but it's more that we don't have blood right. And we don't have blood right because we can't get blood right according to Steiner, which is, and blood is, according to Steiner, blood is your hyperdimensional interface between spirit and the body. And it only is that when it's in the body. And when you take it out, it's nothing. Like it's not doing that anymore. So it's just cells. It's not diagnostic. It can't tell you anything once it's out. And so that's the only way we can do blood tests. And according to him, it's like they're literally all wrong. Like you're literally not getting blood right, because blood only works as this interface between spirit and physical when it's in you or in anything, a fish, whatever. So that hasn't stopped people doing all kinds of weird stuff in the background of worldwide blood drives and genetics and all the rest of it to see if there are recent physical interventions. And I'm not like, I go in and out on that. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And the R negative stuff is one of the ones that, like rhesus negative is one of the ones that has a lot of history, has a lot of history to it. That, again, if we don't have blood right, there's not a lot of like confirming statements that we can make about it. And I think that's really fascinating. What I think we're experiencing at the moment, and this is that like Charles Fort idea, is that the tools we use to verify reality are no longer working. Because that's what happens when we move out of the dominant of science into the dominant of wider inclusions. He says it's not, we don't learn more, like in the Thomas Kuhn idea, where we just get smarter and smarter. That's an imperial idea. He's like, no, the methods of making things true no longer work. So science showed up and it invalidated the previous methods of making things true, which were biblical. And then now, like, everything has showed up, the dominant of wider inclusions. It's UFOs, it's ghosts, it's TikTok, it's whatever has showed up, and it's made, and so our politics and our medicine and our science, none of it works anymore. And it's a really exciting moment. So at the edges of all this stuff, I do think probably, I mean, in fact, I know there was intervention at different points, but there's, tracing different bloodlines. I defer to Steiner when it comes to blood tests.
I mean, hasn't science even gotten the heart wrong? Don't they say it?
Oh, completely.
Really
That's like that's my wheelhouse at the moment. Yeah, absolutely. It can't pump. It's not. It's a sensor and a vortexer, and that, really fascinating. And I love that stuff. I'm obviously deep in it at the moment.
Oh, cool. We look forward to hearing more. Well, my question actually had to do with Charles Fort, because there you talk about metaphors helping us see and experiencing the paranormal, UFOs and all that, and you bring in Fort and his deep sea fish. You repeat it, where what is a ship to a human is not what is a ship to a fish, and you talk about the cat in the library reading a book or surrounded by books.
Yeah. So that's obviously from William James, when he said we're like pets.
Yeah.
What if we're like pets in our library when we're in the universe, right? So a pet doesn't know what a library is, but also somehow does. Like they're aware that humans, which are more advanced than them, as far as they can see, come in here and do things, and we're in it as well. So what does a cat think a book is, other than somewhere to lie down, obviously? And similarly, and I like Fort's version of this, is not just how does a fish understand a ship compared to a human, but also if a piece of that ship falls off and sinks which it does, and sinks all the way to the bottom of the ocean, what do the fish at the bottom of the ocean, the deep sea fish, think that is? They don't even have a conception of the surface, because they can't. They will die if they try to get to it, right? Because they're designed for a high pressure environment. So they not only don't know what a ship is, they can't even conceive of the surface where the ship operates in its kind of like normal functioning. And that's kind of interesting for deep sea fish, because all their food comes from a place that they cannot get to or conceive of, because everything that like whales die and other fish and all that kind of stuff sort of propagates down to the seafloor, and this is the sort of base of the seafloor ecosystem. So it was just one of those clever things that he's like, what is a deep sea, especially once they hit their nose on it, like what does a deep sea fish think a bit of metal hull off a ship is? Because it doesn't even understand the ocean, or the surface of the ocean. And you think that's amazing, and it's just like the best way into our feeble attempts to understand something like ufology. I think he was, a genius, obviously.
Yeah, he was indeed a genius, and his later books are really cool. He gets definitely very Gnostic with the idea of archons or spirits and being trapped in the universe.
And that he said we were property. So
yes, we are slaves. Yeah. So Fort, I like his conclusions. But yeah, awesome. Well, I think we are at the end. For the audience, of course, there will be a replay on YouTube a few minutes from here, and I will put the audio version on all the podcast providers tomorrow. Again, you got some taste of Gordon's talk at the Astronosis. Please show up. Please get online tickets. We will give presentations. We are going to, in a week, we will be hanging out at a very cool cocktail party.
There's still time. Don't think you can't do it. You can just be like, fuck it, Mexico.
By the beach, we're going to have this awesome cocktail party, and we're going to try to get Chris Knowles drunk so he can sing. And we're going to have a lot of other cool events, talks, Q&A panels, and magic. I'm sure we're going to do some ceremonies. Lawrence Gallian, he's decided he's going to do this magic Sufi ceremony at the end of his talk. We're going to let him go for it. Who am I going to stop a Sufi magical ceremony in a conference? So very excited. So please show up, and we'll always appreciate your support. So we'll wrap. Oh, and of course I have to say that.
Isn't it good?
I love this. It's my favorite bookmark ever. Long Live Heresy, which I got with this book. It's so cool. Cool publisher. Love Scarlet Imprint. And the quality is just incredible. It's a handsome book. Very handsome.
It really is. It's their prettiest book they've ever done. It's amazing. When it showed up, I'm like, I can't. It's exactly what I wanted it to be. And I take no credit for it, but it's exactly what I wanted it to be. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we better wrap it up. Vance, thanks for keeping us company in this journey of the organism that is the world, that is the universe, that is reality.
As always, my pleasure. Thanks to everybody who showed up there in the audience. Thank you, Gordon. It was been delightful hearing your views and knowledge of animism.
Thank you kindly. Always a pleasure.
All right. Well, Gordon, we shall see you sooner rather than later. And to the audience, get his book. Thanks for making this book happen, Gordon.
Thank
you. For everybody else, as I say, thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self, here in the desert of the real. Again, I've been saying desert all these years.
Gnosticism
is a desert. It's a desert. Desert song. So, but write your own gospel, live your own myth. Until the next one, everybody have a good night and a good week.